for joining me. This is Damien Stevens, host of MSP Mindset. Guys, we have a special treat from Dave Sobel today. Just a word, it is previously recorded, so we're not ignoring your questions. We love your questions. Drop them in. If we won't be able to take them today since this is previously recorded, but we'll love to get them answered in a follow-up episode. Thank you guys so much for being here. Hey guys, thank you for joining me on this episode of MSP Mindset. We're talking with the one, the only Dave Sobel, and about a super popular topic, right? AI. If you haven't heard of it, I don't know what rock you've been hiding under. Your clients are using it. So your techs are using it if you're not. So guys, a little bit about Dave Sobel. He is the host of the Business of Tech podcast, one of the top 50 podcasts. He runs a leading IT services focused news and analysis podcast, tons and tons of YouTube subscribers. He's the owner of MSP Radio. He is a force in the media who actually talks about real things, and you won't have to wonder how he's feeling. He's an author, and he has actually run an MSP for north of a decade. So he probably knows what it's like, or at least used to. So with that, let me welcome you, Dave.
What a nice way of saying he's a blowhard too. Thanks for having me, Dave. This is so much fun. I am opinionated and I don't mind saying it anymore.
Well, that seems like one of the fun things being after running your MSP. You don't have to worry is like one of those big providers going to disconnect you, or if I offend the wrong person, right? So you can call it as you see it, which is
almost
cool.
my reason for being was I remember a lot of that, being an MSP and being afraid. You're smaller and you're afraid to speak out because of that, of angering your vendors. And it's like, well, maybe somebody needs to do that job sometimes. And so I try and call them like I see them, and be honest and authentic. And here I am now.
Yeah. No, I enjoy that part of our conversation back staged right before this. And so guys, we're talking about AI, and that's just getting broader by the minute. So Dave has been covering tons of stuff on his podcast about it and really diving deep. And I know I'm excited. Dave, tell me about your perspective on what this means to businesses and MSPs.
I mean, I'm more excited about this technology than I've been for anything. And by the way, I'm a healthy skeptic. I've been burned by a lot of tech over the past, decade or two. So I'm healthy on the skepticism, but the adoption numbers are real, right? The fastest consumer product ever to 1 million users, and like blew the competition away in terms of adoption numbers. And then what's interesting to me is how they're sticking around. 1 in 3 people are using it daily, but more importantly, 70% of them have not told their bosses. It's like shadow IT on speed. It's amazing,
That's
right? Like
crazy.
yeah, it's crazy adoption numbers. They're sticking around. They're using it on a regular basis. They're also just doing it. Like it's just happening. And and that for me is super interesting. The other thing is it fits very much into the area where I think the most value for MSPs live, which is up in the productivity layer. MSPs spend way too much time noodling over the stack or the tech or the infrastructure bits. And it's like, that's not actually where the value is anymore.
Right.
Generally, you get up every single day and your technology just generally works, right? Like we're not when I launched my MSP in the olden days where actually keeping these machines alive was work. It's a lot easier now, right? Not to be dismissive of that
Right.
there is work to do it right, but it's not as difficult as it was. And in fact, you can roll out complex systems pretty easily. That's the whole point of SaaS. So the real value for people is up in helping them be effective with the technology that they can deploy really quickly. And this is instantly inserted itself into that entire level, affecting exactly productivity. And that's why I'm excited about it.
Yeah. So I want to pull out a couple things, right? What did you say? 1 out of 3 are
Well, one
70%
out
are
of three
using it?
already using it in their day, in their work, in
Yeah.
their daily work.
Yeah. And most bosses probably don't know that, right? Most have
More
no
than
idea.
70% don't tell their boss.
Yeah.
Right. It's
Yeah,
just how about
interesting.
that? How about that? All you compliance officers, are you quaking in your boots now? Like,
Right. Yeah.
you should be, right?
Right.
Because that's what, and that's the very definition of disruptive tech is
Right.
when it happens at that level.
Yeah, and speaking of disruptive, it makes me wonder, right? There's disruptive like, oh, you're using an app that we haven't vetted and it might have a security hole or what have you. And of course that could apply. But, I was just issued a patent recently. I was just thinking like, who owns this? Like I think they're trying to make it more clear, but still it's like you're using this and you didn't know and your employees using it. Now they've generated small parts or maybe the entire the promotion of this show, the marketing we decided to have fun with, and all the headlines and almost all the content was entirely generated by
Hmm.
ChatGPT, just to have fun with it. We knew it was quite capable, but when you put it to that test, so yeah, disruptive in like, is it the message you want? Is it the tone you want? Is it even owned by you anymore? I mean, there's a lot of questions out there.
Yeah, I love questions. You know why I like questions? Because this is where all the profit lives, everybody. It's like solving hard problems. That's where the profit lives. So yeah, I mean, you can break down so much of that in terms of like there is tons of questions to be answered around ownership, around copyright. We're already getting some guidance on that. The copyright office has already come out and said they're not going to be copywriting generative AI works like direct works. They're not going to copyright those. And so, we're getting guidance pretty quickly. I immediately highlight and say, like, tracking all of those changes. Yeah, that's your value. Solution providers, MSPs, IT services companies, like that's your value, is keeping tracking, helping, being involved in that advice. Uh, it's impactful, right? Where it's being used, how that information is being sent out into the models. OpenAI has made some, as an example, has made changes recently to their licensing, saying that it's an opt-in where your queries are then used as part of the training model. The idea there is to keep people feeling safe with putting confidential information into the models. That
Right.
makes some sense. But by the way, that was a question, right? It was a question because it was being used, and now they've made it an opt-in. But every compliance officer and legal team at a company now needs to be checking, like, have we done all of that? Are our users aware of making sure to not opt in, or should you have a policy of not putting confidential information into the models? Like,
Right.
there's
It's not
all
just the
these.
output, right? It's not just the
Right.
output.
And
Even
by the
what you
way,
put in these things.
there's a whole space now of prompt engineering, right? Of
Right.
the asking it the right questions and using the right prompts is a skill. And
Mhm.
by the way, it's a new one, and I'm going to laugh at anybody who puts a job listing up looking for 5 years experience prompt engineering. I'm going to laugh at them. Uh,
Right.
but that's not to be dismissive of the fact that it is something to learn. Literally, was diving into a case study just this week of an English major who is now specialized in building prompts and has done repeated testing the same way a QA engineer would do to be able
Mhm.
to replicate results. That's a programming language. We're just programming in English. It's
Right.
so fascinating.
Yeah. So I guess one of the questions, so lots of AI. Do we only listen to? Should we only be thinking about Chat GPT and news about that? Do we need to become prompt engineers? Like, help us. I guess I'd love your thoughts on like what's interesting. Where are things going? I know Bing's integrated it, and obviously Facebook did something, and now there's an alpaca running around, and there's all kinds of
Mhm.
things going around. So like, I'd love your input on like where, if I'm digging in, if I'm unsure, like where to start. What do you recommend, Dave?
Yeah, it's chaos. It's great, right?
Yeah.
So there's a certain degree of like you want to think about this analysis the same way. AI itself is not a product, right? AI itself is not something that you sell to your customers. And anybody who's thinking that is not wrapping it up. There is you need to understand the product space and
Hmm.
understand the products that apply to your customers that are going to be relevant. So ChatGPT is one example. Uh, Bing and Bing Chat is an implementation of that. You've got Google just released Bard. You've got Claude out there, which is another one that's up and coming. Meta's got their large language model that they're working on. Knowing that list is going to be a thing, and then I break down to you also need to understand the models that are available. And understanding the differences in the models and what they do will become one of your skill sets so that you can analyze products and their usage and understand their capabilities. So, for example, within the realm of ChatGPT, we're already into there are models, right? There's GPT-4, there's GPT 3.5 Turbo, which is the one that was impressing everybody last month. There are other models of that, Da Vinci and such that go beyond that. You're going to dive into the different models. Over on the generative image side, there's things like Stable Diffusion and DALL-E. Adobe just announced their models, which are called Firefly. Firefly is kind of interesting because they've been very careful about the training data to only be public domain data and images they know. That's a subtle difference. Anybody in the art world is going to really care about that. And you can already see the framework of, hey, I need to understand these models in order to advise my customers on which ones do what. Then I break it down into two other areas. I think prompt engineering is a skill.
Hmm.
And I'm not necessarily saying every MSP out there is going to now become a prompt engineer.
Right.
No, but you need to start understanding this. You need to think of it like a programming language. You need to understand that your customers are likely going to need education in this area, and thus knowing that area of skill, the better you get into it, the more it's going to be a deliverable service. And the final area for me is I wrap it up in ethics. Literally just asking the question of, can we do it, but should we do this? I've been talking on the show for a while now about the field of data management and the idea of helping customers make sure that they are only collecting data that they have a distinct reason to do so. You actually can minimize your risk by making sure that you're only collecting the stuff that you do. And from a security perspective, right, you can't be ransomed on data you didn't collect. And oftentimes there was a default of just, well, hoover everything up, save everything you possibly can because we're going to need it all. Well, maybe that's not the best way to do it. And particularly
Right.
in this world, we're going to want to be selective about, do we know why we're collecting the data that we're collecting to make sure that we're keeping it, and we're keeping it at a right data to retention level. And then you can then apply that as a next level. Hey, what data do we want to use in our prompts, in our language models? Do we want to give to the AI? What are the kinds of questions we're comfortable with? Where is the divide for us in terms of the way that we want to apply this? I'll give you a great use case. I've been thinking a lot about, and watching a lot of MSPs and IT services companies immediately start going, oh, we can put this in as a chat support bot. Yeah, I'm not sure that's gonna be the way that it's gonna be best received. Perhaps it's more like, I
Right.
mean, I think Microsoft chose the right name, Copilot. Maybe the
Mhm.
idea is it works more next to your engineers and augments your engineers, and you're still giving the human touch to customers. And in fact, I can also see that getting replicated with customers themselves. I don't
Mhm.
think a lawyer is gonna wanna turn over their interactions with their customers to a chatbot,
Right.
but having generative AI there to help the lawyer on parsing information and making it more concise to work with customers, that's the match. And so you can see it how you're going to do it yourself and how you're going to do it with your customers, and getting good at that kind of ethics and thinking about the right way to do it. I think that's a skill. And by the way, people are going to pay for that advice.
Right. So it sounds like, we're aligned. This is very transformative. It's interesting technology, I think, but important distinction is it people are getting value out of it in a big way, right? It's the adoption is huge. It's Vicky. If you look at this next to a social media network, this is faster than them in terms of adoption, right? The number
Yeah.
of
Oh, yeah.
daily active users, and they're not just mindlessly scrolling; they're having to input information to get something out. So I guess if you see this, if you believe in this, guys, and you think this is going to be part of the future, it's part of the present. But if it's here to stay, um, what should I be doing to what investments in time, people, other things should I make as an MSP to make
I mean,
sure that I'm ahead or well prepared? Because obviously there's going to be the folks that just do nothing, that get worried about the ethics, scared about the bots taking over, and not that those aren't things we should discuss, but there will be people that just sit on the sidelines. So how do I become one of those people that doesn't, and what should I do?
yeah. Now, so what's interesting is while this is moving super fast, I actually think at the same time it is still an opportunity to be deliberate. We in tech move incredibly quickly, and while the adoption is incredibly fast, I also think customers are not necessarily moving exactly at that speed. They want to be deliberate and they want to move at a planned pace, and the planned pace is what matters. The planned pace can be at whatever speed they're comfortable moving. So my thinking to those IT companies, MSPs, is like, I think you're going to want to look at this like any product and services launch, right? Particularly because we're all in the services business. You're going to want to be deliberate about thinking about it. This is the way that I'm going to approach it, and be iterative. I have this model that I worked on when I was a vendor, called the perpetually valuable MSP, and the idea behind it was is that you're always examining your service offerings, and and refreshing them. You're phasing old ones out and you're adding new ones in. And this is exactly that. Is you're now examining it, you're understanding what's going to happen, and build a service offering. By the way, that's consulting, everybody. That's not, I'm going to sell this one widget. It is, there's going to be a process and procedure that I work with my customers on to deliver advice, to deliver a plan, to work with them out. That is consulting. It is people, not a thing that you just sell and walk away from. But you build that and you iterate over it. You're going to probably launch with your point 0.7 version of it, right? Where you're trying it out, and you're probably working on that yourself. And then you're going to iterate and you
Right.
make it to your 1.0. And then you go, okay, this process is reasonably good, but you're going to continue to learn and you're going to do it over time. Then you'll have your 1.5 version and you'll have your 2.0, and you'll keep working on it over time and you'll keep iterating. And you want to be kind of agile. And I think you can apply models like agile development and DevOps style development to this process to build these things, and just keep working on it and keep trying it out. You may try it out on yourself for a while and just keep moving. You don't have to drop everything and immediately shift your whole business. Instead, you're going to be doing this iterative work to make sure you're constantly improving and moving forward at the same time.
Interesting. So, what are your thoughts on? So, we've talked a lot about helping the client, which is what matters most, obviously, at least in
Mhm.
my opinion. What about? There's a lot of talk about I can, how do you think this will change the MSP business itself? There's a lot of talk around I can, whether it's a chat bot or not, maybe I can train that against my tickets. and I can essentially do away with some of my or all of my L1 texts because now I can get is the printer on or is it out of ink, or some of those things responded to or answered, um, more quickly. So, what kind of impacts do you think it's going to have kind of structurally to an MSP outside of client
Yeah,
thinking?
it's funny because I look at it and I sort of say, I think these people that think, oh, it's going to eliminate my L1 texts, yeah, I think you're looking at it wrong. What it may
Mm-hmm.
change is it may mean that non-technical people can be L1 techs. I
Mm,
look at it that way. Particularly in a world where isn't it tough to find techs? We're still in a really
absolutely.
difficult hiring perspective. Why are we immediately saying I want to get rid of techs and instead saying I can expand the pool of people that I can make into these techs? Right? I can arm them with a toolkit and focus on good customer service. Why don't you hire people that are friendly and talk well to customers, pick up the phone, and give them tools that allow them to answer those basic questions in a very friendly way, right? I think of it that way much more than this idea of I'm going to automate it away. And by the way, come on, everybody. Don't you get mad when you get when you have these chat bots and phone trees put between you and customers? You're in the business of delivering service,
Service.
manage
Please.
service
Yeah,
provider. Like,
exactly.
focus on being good at service, everybody. And this is not about automating away the customer interaction. The idea behind, and it's funny because everyone talks about how disruptive the managed services, but like the core idea for me around technology advice and small businesses that help other small businesses with their technology, that core value has not changed in 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
Like the basic idea of a good provider is that I'm going to help my customers with their technology needs. That is the value you deliver. That value has not changed. And the value is about helping them with their technology, not about being super cool with the latest widget in the back
Right.
end or how amazing your technical stack is. None of that matters. What matters is the customer being helped by the things that you are delivered and you're being effective. And by the way, I've got a model for thinking about that. On my YouTube channel, I've got a video where I break down like a method for delivering value, and it's about thinking about the customer's profit and loss statement. Are
It
you
sounds
helping?
obvious, but
Yeah,
interesting. Yeah.
well, it sounds obvious, but a lot of people don't take the time to think about that. Where are you in their profit and loss statement? And I call it my good, better, best model. It's good if you are an expense line item. You live down in SG&A and
Mm-hmm.
you keep the lights on, right? That's good. That is value. Customers understand that they need technology and they will pay for things that are in the expense line item. They, for example, pay for office space, right? It is a rent. They understand they need it. And you know where it lives? Down in the expense line. Right
Right.
there with electricity and with with the water service and all the things you need. It's good. I do not mean to be dismissive of what that value is,
Right.
but what's better is if you are helping them with cost of goods sold. Can you help them reduce the cost of the services that they sell, the way they make money? Living up in COGS, cost of goods sold, yeah, I like that better, right? Because now you can measure the outcome of their technology spend against that series of line items. But you know what's best? Best is against revenue. Best when
Mm-hmm.
I can help my customers drive more revenue, whatever that means for them. Maybe it means more selling of their service, more selling of their widget. Maybe in a not for profits, it's membership, like driving more membership. There are all different ways of measuring what their top line revenue is. If you are directly impacting that, you are delivering the best version of that. And that's where I think that everyone is saying like, oh, this is immensely disruptive to the basic model. No, not it isn't if you're thinking about it in these terms. This is just a new series of skills, services, and AI driven products that I can then use to deliver that service.
Yeah. Fascinating, right? If I can drive more revenue, then not only am I hired, but boy, I'm not switching you out. Like I'm
Right.
staying. You're
Hey,
you're
one
in
of,
there.
Right. Want to be sticky forever? Be the guy that's helping to deliver 10% more top line revenue.
Right. Right.
You'll never get
Even
fired, everybody.
yeah, even COGS is an order of magnitude better than I think most MSPs are used to
A
doing.
100%. And particularly when you can show it, right? When you've taken the time to link your services and the things you do to those customer outcomes, 100%.
Right. Interesting. So I want to switch gears for a second and come back to this. We were talking backstage about the inevitable backup issues, and you had a particularly memorable one, that recovery issue, because we were talking about, like, are you delivering value? You're able to do things. So tell us about that, Dave, if you don't mind.
I always just say the worst day of my career, 100% number. So I during my MSP, we were supporting a cancer care facility, a regional cancer care facility. So they did all of the things that you would do in terms of treating people, taking images, delivering therapy, like all of those bits, and we ran their infrastructure. And this is old enough. I'm old enough on this one. There's no cloud. This is all on prem.
Mm-hmm.
And one of their servers went down, and we were diligent. Like, we were the organization that not only did backups but also did restores. But we were having a problem with the ability to do the restore, and it was just taking forever. And there was a lot of us finger crossing to make sure that it was working. And I was on site helping to manage the environment, mostly because my techs were working as you would want them to, right? Please continue restoring this thing. Find a way to get it back. Uh,
Right.
right. And my job was interfacing with the client, and I will never forget, because thinking that she was helping, she says, "Well, you're aware that every hour of downtime is hours of treatment, and that could result in dead patients."
Oh my God.
And you're sort of like, no pressure, no pressure. No, I wasn't. I mean, I was already aware of how important this service was and the kind of work you did, and I thought about these ideas. But having a client essentially standing there saying, people can die because of this. It's like, you are definitely not helping to keep the the pressure lower. I'll never forget it, and
Wow.
and I have never been one who was cavalier about backups. To this day, I am intensely paranoid. I'm the kind of guy who takes three. Ooh,
Yeah, no worries. Go for it. Take a sip.
I'm the kind of guy who does 3 or 4 backups. So I'm that guy. Ooh.
Yeah. No. It's like you're talking to the guy that's paranoid about backup. So yeah, if you've ever been burned or close to it, like that's the time you'll be paranoid.
Excuse me, I get going and get excited.
No worries.
So I'm that guy who's excited, right? So I get super into it. And yeah, I mean, I've always been paranoid about it. I'm super diligent about testing, about restores, about making sure that stuff all works. And wow, that is the roughest day of my career.
Wow. Yeah, that's a hard to top. Like, people may die like that. I don't want to hear that. Like, I've been in the spot where I'm like, I don't know if we're going to recover data, and it was already horrible without somebody saying people may die.
Right. Oh,
So
I know. Like, you're not helping. And it's funny because I have always kept that lens of, is the work that I'm doing gonna kill anybody?
right.
Right. And it immediately puts a lot in perspective.
Yeah.
If your work isn't gonna kill somebody, you can be a lot more even keeled about the way that you approach things.
Yeah, my wife was in nuclear medicine, so she did those kinds of imaging scans. And I
Yep.
would like a bad day in IT is not like a bad day in your world. If
No,
you
no, 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 no.
misdiagnose
No.
cancer, that's a different level.
Right. Those people, like, I always just start, that's real work, right? Like,
That's
that's
real
real
work.
intense. That's real work. Like,
That's
I
real.
do work, that's real work.
Completely agree. Yeah, anybody in healthcare, especially with life and death situations, a whole different thing. So, speaking of that, guys, this show is brought to you by Servosity Safe Managed Backups, and the reason that I wanted to share this with you is I was an MSP that lost data using the best of breed tools. My eyes were open that if I didn't test my backups, I didn't know what I had. So with Servosity Safe, you can cut your support tickets in half, let us manage your backups, and do all of the testing for you. Daily testing of every single volume, weekly, monthly, and quarterly testing, including full DR testing. Plus, we store your backups in tamper proof, immutable storage. So, what makes us different is we test everything. We don't trust anything. We're paranoid about it. And by fully managing it means you can be absolutely sure that your backups are absolutely restorable. And instead of babysitting backups, you can take your best engineers and put them on the things that make you money. So, in Dave's words, we're at least on the COGS line, if not on the revenue line, because we can redeploy your people somewhere that makes you more effective. Now you can go back to playing with fun things like AI. Oh,
Because we like
sorry.
playing with technology.
Exactly. Yeah. So, yeah, that's quite the story you had there. And I wanted to kind of say that intentionally, like playing with AI, because there are parts of it. I know I've been working with different parts of it that feel that there's so much fun. This can't be work. And so some of it, I think it's hard to find the line between am I playing with this because it's just intellectually interesting, or is this going to open up a new avenue, a new service? It's everything from prompt engineering to one of my guys downloaded Alpaca and ran the language model on his system and trained it just to see if he could and actually ran it locally. So what are your thoughts on that, Dave?
Well, this is usually the time when technologists get a thing, right, where they start figuring out what it can do, and it's incredibly versatile.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because there's two things that I've been thinking about a lot. The first is that economic pressures are generally when we have those times of explosion. People forget the IBM PC was launched when there were 17% interest rates. That was a particularly challenging time.
That's
You look at
unthinkable.
the we're coming out of the recession in the 90s when the internet launched. We had an additional, the iPhone tended to come around right at the time where we're coming out of the banking crisis of 08 and the recession there. Is this that? I don't know yet, right? But it has a lot of the pieces of that. But by the way, lots of innovation and creative thinking happens during more turbulent recession, like economic times. So the
Right.
alignment is certainly there. And additionally, when you have something like this, you've got the ability to reassemble it in lots of ways. Think about early technologies. Did they understand exactly what it was? I was reading a piece recently in the thought of think about the light bulb, right? It was solving the problem of we don't want to have gas lighting in our homes. But the light bulb created all kinds of other things that were byproducts of that we did not necessarily see. I mean, you can go back, go all the way back. Go back to the I won't say invention of, but the discovery of the use of fire,
Mm-hmm.
right? Likely its first uses were around cooking, but then it had and light, but then it also allowed humanity to have much more flexibility with where they lived and could sleep because of the ability to create warmth, and then the downstream effects of being able to be more mobile, being able to be more and allow early humans themselves to be more analytical and create new situations. Like it opens all of these inventions of tech open up a bunch of downstream effects that you don't know about. Again, I'm not sure this is one of those, but it certainly has some signs of it, and you can see that experimentation that we're talking about is literally humans figuring out the kinds of possibilities and wrapping their heads around, is this one of those things? Could be, looks it,
Right.
smells a lot like it, right? And clever people are going to move on the opportunity there. I also think that we are getting better about asking the questions of what are the downsides,
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's another area where those of us with expertise have the ability to raise our hands and talk about and say, like, hey, I want us to make sure that we're thinking about the downsides of this. And that whole, it's why I bring up ethics as one of the services I think that's possible, is I don't want to have these conversations from like the sky is falling perspective. I just want
Right.
us to be thoughtful about making sure that we're implementing it in ways that are positive versus negative.
Right. Right. So you can't deliver ethics as a service, is what you're saying.
I think you
Okay.
actually can. I actually think you can.
Okay.
I'm not necessarily convinced that customers will pay for that,
Mm-hmm.
but I also think they are distinctly paying for advice.
Yeah.
That's always been what they've paid for. And I think adding that layer of thoughtfulness about and because it's tied to business outcomes, right? We want to think about both the positive and negatives outcomes of the implementation of technology. Putting an ethics lens around that actually helps you have smart conversations about what the outcomes are, so that they aren't only the positive ones, that we are also looking at the downstream effects so that we can potentially mitigate them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think what you said is where we are today, right? If this is new and shiny to us and interesting, it is. And what did you say? 70% of employees or something like that of people are adopting it. So some huge number.
Huge number. Generally, what I'm using 1 in 3 is the data I just saw in terms of like already using it daily, and then of that, 70% are not telling their boss.
Oh, 70% aren't telling the boss. Thank you for that, correcting me there. Yeah. So, wow. Yeah. And the not telling your boss is an interesting one. What are your thoughts on that? Any guesses as to
Well,
why?
the the answer is, I can only speculate. I would look at it and say, like, it depends. Do you tell your boss about every tool you use to do your job?
Hmm.
You probably don't tell them if you purchase pens. You don't tell them if you're purchasing lights, right? I mean, like, it's that kind of thing.
Right.
And, I mean, you probably use all kinds of small bits of technology that you don't talk to your boss about. Chrome extension plugins, or there's all kinds of things that you don't necessarily always tell your boss about. It's interesting that this one's falling into that category, right? That a lot of people are just not, that are just using it the same way they use another tool. I think it speaks to both the ubiquity, but also to just the ease of use, that it doesn't require that kind of stuff. I don't necessarily think it's a always an intentional, I am not telling my boss. I think it's more you don't necessarily always tell your boss about all of the things that you are using in your work world if they're viewed just as tools.
Right.
Could be that. I think the other thing about it is that everyone is looking, it is a useful way to augment your own capability. And I think at the same time there is sometimes shame to talking about that. Like, I am hired to do the job. If I use automation to automate away my job, maybe the boss thinks that I will, I am replaceable.
Right.
I will tell you that my thinking on this is never that it's going to replace people. I think it's actually going to augment people. I think more importantly, it is going to change roles, and people are scared of their role being changed in a way that they are no longer a part of it. And that's more a reflection in my mind of the cultures of those organizations, where your employees are not necessarily in a position to talk about that kind of stuff, and you want to create collaborative environments, particularly in small companies, because
Yes.
that's how you can be innovative. So I would tell leaders and owners and managers to focus on that portion of it, rather than going, why aren't they telling me how effective they can be? It could be fear and communication. Focus on that.
Yeah. No, I think culture, it always comes back to culture. And I will say, just a team meeting we had internally, we were talking about this. And, what are your thoughts? Let's all talk about that. And we had every range from, I have a lot of fear about it and I'm worried about the ethics of it. And I'm worried about, even if they say they won't share, if we feed it too much of uh, customer data or our proprietary data or whatever, will that somehow, like there was a recent bug, like all software has in OpenAI, that it could see a little bit of your chat history that it's not supposed to. So again, it's one of those, like they had fear, like will the question I asked to get out there, or whatever prompts I've fed it, or proprietary information. And I think general fear of what's this mean for my job. And on the other end, I've had my engineers that are like, oh, I spent all weekend, compiling the new large language model from Stanford, and the latest version of Alpaca that was the Meta Facebook thing. So there's going to be people on all sides of that, and we're obviously a technology organization with uh, quite technical people, like either as technical as an MSP, or in some case software developers that are doing things like compiling large language models. So I don't think the average business that is not a tech business will be even as comfortable. So, but like you said, we're still a small business. We're having conversations. I want to understand, and everybody's got a valid. I don't have all the answers. I don't have most of the answers, and
Right.
everybody's got the input.
Right. And by the way, oftentimes everyone's looking for the answer. There isn't an answer. There's a bunch of answers that are different for different people, and you come to different conclusions and different implementations. And by the way, this is why I like the space. Complexity and not single answer is the joy of it, because in complexity is that mystery, and in mystery there's margin. That's why it's interesting, and everyone's looking for that
Well
one
said.
answer, right? That's not the trick. The trick is the process and getting that group of people to come to the conclusion that works for them and for their circumstance that is best for them. You want to be part of the process to help them get there, and that's a good business.
Right. So if you were an MSP today and you were faced with this challenge, you're looking at AI, what would you do? Would you, as an owner, spend time on it only? Would you ask all of your team to give input? Would you say, I want to dedicate a part of a team or a person to really investigate this heavily? Like, how heavily would you bet in this? How hard would you lean?
It's a great question, and the answer is I don't think I have a simple, easy answer to that. And let me pause by saying I know a bunch of people are going to look and go like, oh, what did Dave say? I want to do that plan. It's like, well, let me actually tell you where my thought process would be on making that decision. I'm actually would be looking at my customer base, particularly an existing MSP. I'm going to look at my customer base, and I'm going to understand what their business is. I'm going to start having conversations with my customers about what are the use cases that we can apply this kind of technology to. And I'm going to be investigating and understanding what my role would be in helping that and making that a possibility for them. Then I'm going to map that to what kind of offerings and how I think I want to take it to market. And then that's how I would start thinking about the way that I'm going to bring what level of people, and do I have the right skills, and do I need to train people? And I'd walk through that process. I think particularly when you are doing that thinking about launching new services, I do think you want to be involving all of the stakeholders in this. That's included. So you want to have conversations with customers, with your employees, with your partners, with your vendors. Like, you're going to be working that process iteratively to get that feedback and build your version of that plan. That's the way that I would be working on this. And I would be including these conversations in conversations with my customers, because back to the early premise, you want to be talking to your customers about their business, and you want to tie it to their business outcomes. Why not ask the questions?
Right. Yeah. And you mentioned several models earlier, right? Everybody's probably heard of ChatGPT. There's lots of others. Google's even got Bard. I don't know this. I've heard, at least I think Google's claim is they've got some additional training, and they think it's better for healthcare, right? So if you're in the healthcare business, maybe that shapes the tools and the models you use, because maybe that's perhaps the direction you want to investigate if you're a healthcare focused or healthcare niche MSP.
Yeah.
You want to
And
help
that's
them
referring
be a
back to what we were
co-pilot.
talking about. We are talking earlier about the models, right? This is where I think one of the skill sets that you're going to be focused on as a services provider is understanding the capabilities of the different models, what they're
Mm-hmm.
trained on, how large they are, what their data sets are, what their parameters are. That's going to matter. They're not all the same by design, right? Like, that's
Right.
part of it. You can have lots of different ones. You can have the same kind of idea, train on different ones. Like, learning that space is going to be an entire, skill set, is knowing what those models are and keeping track of them on a regular basis. We're getting lots of announcements. They're coming fast and furious with people on that. So you're going to need to dedicate some of your time as a provider to keeping up with that stuff.
Sure. It's not the it's not just getting your MCSE anymore, right? It's been a few years since that was the thing to do, and you thought you knew a few things.
Right,
As
exactly. I mean, it moves, and it, by the way, it moves fast. Welcome to technology, everybody. You got into it because it was exciting in a change industry. Well, this is a change. Welcome aboard. But by the way, this is always what it is. And you sort of smile, and that's where you have a process to manage change. That's why I talk a lot about this idea of, refreshing and reinvesting in your own services. You need to be taking some time to constantly examine the market and understand what you want to integrate in and what you also want to stop doing in order to make room for these new offerings.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Stop doing something. You can't just keep adding. So whether it's your plate
I
or
mean, you
your
you
text, you got to take
can.
something off of it.
Right. I mean, you can, but you have to find a way to pay for everything. And generally, it's my experience that people do not have infinite resources. So generally, the quickest way to free up resources is take things that are no longer relevant or no longer profitable or no longer timely and phase them out. That's
Right.
healthy. It's part of an active business, but we don't spend enough time talking about that portion of it.
Right. Yeah. I know I don't mean to make this a plug, but I talk to so many MSP owners about backup, and they're paranoid about it, and they want to do testing and they never get around to it. And then they learn that we can do all those things for them and not only do testing they're not doing, but free them up. And my point is, if you're the one MSP that raises their hand and says, my differentiator is backup and DR, I'm better at it than anybody, then wonderful. But for everybody else, why not free yourself up and then ask the questions of how do I better serve you in healthcare? How do I get on the revenue or the COGS line? And how do I look at these new AI models and actually do something that moves the needle and differentiates my MSP in a far bigger way than, and I use backup just because it's what we do, but it's the same thing if you switch RMMs, right? Nobody cares, right? It's probably not a game changer or it's a big hassle, but it's a similar thing, I think, right? So what are your thoughts on that, right? What Let me step back from AI. Where should I be if I'm an MSP? Where should I be putting my resources? Obviously, I could put a lot or all of it into AI. Personally, I think changing RMMs is probably not where I'd put any resources. But tell me where would you focus resources?
So generally, it's my experience that MSPs spend far too much time worrying about their back end and their tool set versus leaning into what their customers care about. Their customers care about is driving their business and achieving their goals. They need to, and the more that you, a services organization, lean into that, the more successful you'll be. And I smile and I say, like, I can oversimplify this. Two pitches from two entirely competent IT services providers or MSPs. The first talks about their gold, silver, tin, paper plans, and the
Yeah.
second says, I can help you drive revenue by 10%.
Mm-hmm.
Which does the customer hire?
Right.
There's no consideration to that at all. They hire the second one.
That's right.
Which one do you want to be?
Right. That's exactly right.
It's, lean into that stuff. The more you lean into delivering and solving problems for customers, the more successful you will be. And it will drive your decisions about exactly what we're talking about, how much you need to lean into various technologies and what will drive that outcome for them. And you put that lens on it. It's what I freely admit, it's what I spend when I look at stories for the show. I think a lot about what is the impact of the thing that I'm talking about to an MSP or an IT services company's ability to do something for their customer. I don't worry so much about the stuff that happens on the back end in the back office. I'm reasonably comfortable that most of these providers are smart and will figure out the back end technology they need to run their business. But that is not their core value. The core value
Right.
is what they're doing for their customer.
So I feel like somebody needed to hear that today. So drop a comment if that was you, because I talk to so many, And for example, I think it was really common. We were running the email servers, Exchange, or what have you. And now, hopefully, none of you, or very few of you, hopefully none of you, are running an Exchange server anymore. Very
I
back
hope
office.
not.
Yeah.
It's
I, so if you're
yeah.
still running an email server, why are you doing it? There are better ways to do it. And it's one of those, I think there's the MSPs that said, no, I'm an Exchange expert or something like that. And then it's not what they were in the business of doing. And they missed the transition to, put it in 365 or Google Workspace and move on and deliver a better service. And to me, it's a lot like the railroads that said we're in the railroad business when really they should have realized they were in the transport or logistics business. And when more and more freight went to trucks and that kind of thing, they didn't expand. They competed with only other railroads.
Mhm.
Um, so give me your feedback on that.
Yeah, I mean, I very much think about that. I mean, look, I always again I think about things in terms of we run businesses, right? And businesses are generally designed to be engines to create profit for their owners. If you take a look, the IT services company, the MSP that's looking, what's the number one line item on your P&L in terms of expense? It's labor, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you want to make sure that you're spending your people time is the most important thing that you're spending time on. And it's interesting to me the disproportionate amount of time that a lot of providers spend on these smaller tools sections of their P&L versus the people side of their business. And that translates also, by the way, out to the way you should be thinking about what the things you do. You deliver a service. It is generally delivered by people. You should lean into the people portion of the interactions with your customers. Notice the trend, right? Like that's the bit that's most valuable. And as I said, tie back into what you're doing to drive their top line revenue or helping reduce their cost of goods sold.
Right. People and culture are what matter, what drive your service
Yeah,
business, um, not just AI.
right.
AI may be
And
really fascinating and a big opportunity, right? But it doesn't displace
right.
service.
And because by the way, I immediately the reason I'm so excited about it is it's moving so fast and its ability to augment those people on both sides, both our customers and our own teams, and make them incredibly more capable than they were before. And that's the bit. I like Microsoft's nomenclature, right? I'm very excited by the fact that they're calling theirs in M365 Copilot because it makes perfect sense to me. That is, it's an infinite capacity co-pilot that's sitting next to me, the productivity worker, and making me that much better.
Right.
That sounds pretty compelling to me. And that's the idea that I think we want to latch on to the way we frame the use of this technology.
Yeah. TV didn't replace radio, and uh, search engines have changed the access to knowledge. Right. I think it used to be far more valuable for me to store a lot of facts in my mind. And now I can access all of those in a search engine immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're now expected to be reasonably fluent in how to find those results. Right.
It's totally true. Yeah.
So
It,
is,
yeah. And,
is
and
this the
now
next search
nowadays,
engine?
is it? I don't know. I think the answer is I think it's part of search, and I think it's larger than search. I think it will be disruptive specifically to the search engine space, but I think it is. But trying to say it is just a search engine is limiting to what I think the possibility of the technology is. So it's kind of an and, not an or.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think Google's got to get out there and be in the public mind because that's a perception uh, game. But and why Bing is putting ChatGPT in there immediately, but they're all Microsoft is also putting it in all of M365, and that's something you didn't really do with search. Um,
Well,
you know,
interestingly, I mean, I like to always boil down to if I'm doing an analysis of people's moves. I like to move down, particularly in business. I like to figure out what are the financial motivations to do so.
right,
Google is highly motivated to keep search where they have a dominance the way that it is. Right? They They make money off the ads that they run on Google Search. Google Search is their most important product. Microsoft, on the other hand, wins a lot just by being disruptive in the search space. Satya Nadella himself has come out and said all he has to do is carve off 1% market share and it's worth billions of dollars. He is well and happy to lean into going after that because he can do something differently, carve off a very small piece and make a ton of money. So it's easy for Microsoft to lean in and say we're going to be super disruptive here because they have a lot to gain. Whereas Google has the classic innovator's dilemma problem of if they are disruptive to their core business, they get it wrong. Of course, they don't leapfrog to the next thing and in fact destroy their core business. So shockingly, they were, more slow to do the rollouts on that, and because I think they're one of the
Conservative.
yeah,
Yeah.
well, they're clearly one of the leading AI technology companies in the world. The
Hmm.
T in GPT is something Google invented, right?
Hmm.
But their motion was more protective of their core business because it's their core business, and they were faced with that classic dilemma. Whereas Microsoft can and in this case should be more disruptive because for them the upside financially is in being disruptive. You can always break this down and get an understanding of, oh, okay, that's how this works and why they're acting the way they do, generally because of financial motivation.
Right. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. Any so any controversial thoughts? What do you think is controversial? What do you think people might disagree with you on, or they should hear from Dave?
Um, it's almost like when you say, "Well, what's your most controversial?" It's like I don't necessarily think about it that way. I think that the things that I sort of say is like, look, I'm gonna just say like I think this is a moment to take a look and examine your business and say like how much am I going to lean into this. You can choose zero. My prediction is you will be washed away at some point. I'm not sure I would necessarily, unless I figured it all out, and I haven't, or I would have done it. I wouldn't necessarily go 100%. You're fixing your angle between there to see what lean in is going to be appropriate for you and what you've got the resources to do. I'm not sure I'm necessarily controversial there, but I definitely my guidance is going to be, hey, get moving. You're going to have to pick out what that is.
Yeah, yeah, completely. Get moving. Don't get left behind. Is kind of
Well,
the
or choose to be left. You're making a choice to be left behind. It is just a matter of how long that takes. And by the way, analysts like me are always wrong on speed. Right? We always think it'll happen faster than it does. So it could be just a slow march to irrelevance. But that timing might be okay for you based on your place and your business goals. And I'm never going to say bad things about somebody who's making the right choices for them and their business.
yeah. I distinctly remember about a decade ago, maybe 11 or 12 years ago, some media declaring on-premise IT is dead. There are no on-premise servers or infrastructure at all. A decade ago, right? It's getting closer now, but a decade ago, it was just the beginning. So, yeah, who knows what the speed will be? I did want to ask another question, very practical one. How how do you use this? And maybe tie that into. It seems like there's a lot of like, how do I use this for my customer? Probably questions they should ask that are more important. But I'd love what I think might be a little bit more of a obvious use, which seems to be marketing. Seems like you're probably using it in marketing. I know we are. It seems like MSPs could employ uh, AI, Chat GPT, et cetera, in marketing. Any advice for like, hey, if you just want to dip your toe in or an easy win?
Yeah. So interestingly, I'm not using it strictly in marketing. I actually can tell you the two areas that I use it in. So I'm a writer, right? Like by is I write content that gets that while I'm still reading and talking and making videos and such. There's a lot of writing involved. So I'm actually using. I use ChatGPT to help me for headline writing. I'm very bad at headline writing. I've never been able to master the skill. It's a great headline writer, and it takes my material and helps me write headlines. I use it as a bit of an editor. So I give it some text, and then I can ask it questions about the text, and sort of, and then I additionally use it in analysis. So I can take a bunch of data and go, hey, summarize this for me, give me one or two pieces of that, and then I can iterate my own ideas. I never publish anything that I haven't edited and reviewed myself as a human. Because I don't want to be in a world where the AIs talk to the AIs, and then that doesn't make sense to me in terms of value. I'm not
Well
actually
said.
using it in marketing strictly, with the exception of it is useful for editing and iteration on copy. So for
Hmm.
example, if I might say, like, I write some copy and I need two or three other versions of it. I want to decide if I can tighten it up, or hey, I need this expanded a little bit or tightened up a little bit. I tend to try and use it to tighten content more than expand content.
Hmm.
And part of it is because I think it's not very good at emotion and empathy.
Hmm.
And one of the reasons why is, as somebody who writes, I actually am not that worried for my job with it, is because it is pretty bad at those things. And infusing emotion and experience is a human skill, and I don't think it's anywhere near close my ability to do that. But it can help me be less wordy or tighten up much more than expand. So it's a little bit insight into the way that I'm thinking about it. I'm not necessarily looking at it from the perspective of, oh, I'm applying it to marketing or sales. I'm actually looking at it more in the process of what I do, where infused in the process can it be better.
So just to take that apart, in other words, it's not a marketing or sales question. It's if it can help me in summarization or writing, it can help me in writing across everything,
Exactly,
across
and
all
it can help
those.
me in the writing, right? And and
Hmm.
and how can I use it, apply it to create the outcomes that I want? By the way, like, I can generally kind of tell what's AI driven marketing material, because it's usually pretty generic. And
Hmm.
anybody that knows, like, good marketing actually tells a really good story,
Yes.
and that storytelling is something that it is, again, the AIs are useful at helping create, but the final products are often not quite as emotional as you might want. And by the way, good marketing is about an emotion and a reaction. So I look at it, I don't look at it from the perspective of, like, oh, I'm using it in marketing. I actually say I'm using it in my copy styles, and how can we make our copy styles happen faster, tighter, and to the results that we want using this technology.
Yeah, well said. We wanted to do this just as an experiment and just for the fun of it, do the promotion of this whole episode 100%. But we still didn't feel comfortable with the results we were getting with the 100, like the headlines. We did have the headlines entirely written, but all the body copy or the social media copy, it just didn't, like you said, didn't quite tell the story in the same way. So could you put out huge volumes of what I would call mediocre content? Yes. But can you actually tell a good story? Uh, I
I mean, if
think
you want to be, I always
there's
like,
more.
if you want to be mediocre, knock yourself out. I'm not in that business, right?
Right.
but but again, but don't be dismissive of the accelerant that it is to the process.
Mm-hmm.
To anybody who sat down with a blank piece of paper and not known exactly, like, not, they know sort of what they want to say, but but the words aren't flowing. Don't be dismissive of the ability to use something as a, essentially, that co-pilot, right? I love their branding, that writer sitting next to me that helps me with ideas. Oh, okay, that's an interesting straw man, but I like that point, but those three are boring. Now I'm going to tighten it up, and I'm going to start iterating, and you get the creative process going. Don't be dismissive of what that power is.
Completely. I think you mentioned earlier what some people may be missing is they're thinking generative images with, DALL-E or Stable Diffusion or text with ChatGPT being all kinds of other things. But sometimes I felt giving it, like you said, your whole content and asking it to write a headline or shorten some of your content or summarize. There's a lot of power in that, and it can do it much faster and get rid of some of the writer's block in that. And then personally, I found it helpful for um, give me counter arguments. Take this.
Mhm.
I think this, but write the antithesis, write why I'm wrong. And then I can look at it and go, I'm going to change some of this because I actually agree with some of those points, or something like that. It's good to see both sides. And of course, the more you research one angle, like, hey, AI is really going to have a big impact, go do something about that, may be part of what you're getting out of today's story, and show what are the cons. Why should you maybe not do anything yet? And go ask it that. It's funny, it can talk about
Exactly.
itself.
It can be a collaborative partner versus a replacement, and I'm that's why I'm excited about it, is because I look and say like, oh, this is letting me do a lot more faster than I did before, but it's definitely not replacing me.
Right. Yeah, I think if you were, if you're doing data entry, if you're doing something extremely clerical, or summarization, or something like that, grammar perhaps, then yes, you have some risk. But if you're actually a creative writer, we've got folks on our team that do that. I'm like, you're not going anywhere. You're in perhaps more demand, and you embrace those tools. This has, from my perspective, been amazing, Dave. I'd love to thank you for being here. This has been really cool. And I'd love for you to let everybody know how to get a hold of you, how to get connected to you, how to find your show, your podcast. So
Oh,
let,
well,
let, let
thank
them
you for
know.
having me. These conversations are such fun, and I love talking to listeners. And I love responding to people in comments and stuff. So please let me know. All my stuff you can catch if you're an audio person. I'm on all your favorite podcasters. Look up The Business of Tech over on YouTube. It's youtube.com/MSP Radio. If you go to businessof.tech, that's all the written versions of the stories. We have a weekly newsletter that comes out on Mondays with original long form thoughts from me, as well as you get the daily digest. But I always encourage people, like, find me and follow me on any of your favorite platforms. You can also find me and follow me on LinkedIn. It's a great way to communicate, and I am easy to find, and I love hearing from the audience.
Yeah, this is awesome. Make sure you get connected to Dave. He's got some really interesting stuff. And on the topic of AI, seems to be talking about that seems to be pretty passionate about it. That's one of the reasons we had this conversation. Dave, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Oh, thanks for having me. This has been great.
All right. So thank you guys for being here. If you enjoyed anything, make sure you hit subscribe or like. And if you would like to tell others about this, or get on the podcast, or get on YouTube, LinkedIn, wherever you'd like to go, wherever you hang out, go to mspmindset.com/news. And if you are interested in how you can have more peaceful sleep, fewer tickets, go to sarvasi.com/deep dive and come out, hang out with us. The next topic I'm going to talk about is how to understand true immutability and vendor whitewashing about it. You guys have an awesome week, and I will see you here in 2 weeks.